Okay, we're recording. So, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today?
Phenomenal.
Wonderful. Do you guys want to see why I hate Python so much? Just like as a sidetrack before we get into the JavaScript today? Because we've now done enough in Java that you guys should be able to have some appreciation for this. Like if I showed you this in the first week, you'd be like, well, what the hell is this even, you know? So, Python has classes and objects just like everything else. But the way that it handles everything is terrible. So this is your Python interpreter. If you haven't seen this before, that's what the triple arrow means. Basically, you can enter Python commands on the fly in one of these. Python. Class, foo, empty. So that's your class definition line. So far, very similar to Java. This is what a constructor looks like. All right? Def init with underscores, self. That's two underscore characters. Those are important. So you know how in Java, when you override toString, you just override toString? In Python, each one of the sort of default definitions you override has to have underscores on either side, which is like the most annoying thing in the universe. So, to declare a variable inside of a class in Python, in the constructor, all class parameters must have self in front of them. That's the first argument of all methods in Python is a reference to the object that the method is being called on. You would think you could just do something like in Java and just call it this, or even build self in as a keyword, but no, you have to say self, and then you have to use it everywhere. So if I wanted to say self.x is equal to 5, that's initiating a x variable called 5. Now you may notice, where is my private, where is my public?
Anywhere.
Oh, they have it. Oh, they have it. Self underscore y makes y private. Now, in Java, you just declare it private once, and then you don't have to worry about it. In Python, every bleeding time you use that variable, it must be prepended with those two underscore characters, because that's also technically part of the identifier. There is no namespace conflict between self.x and self.x private. These are different variables. You can have two variables named the same thing, one private, one public.
So the x without the underscores is public right now?
Correct. So there we go. If we declare an object of class foo, let's say f is equal to foo, right? f.x is 5, f.y doesn't exist, f.y with two underscores, it also pretends it doesn't exist, right? It doesn't say, oh, you're trying to access a private member, it says, oh, this thing doesn't exist, right? Yes. Oh, and by the way, if you assign to an element, it just creates it on the fly. So here's a fun thing about classes in Python. They have an attribute called __dict__, which is a dictionary of everything contained in the class. So f.dict is a dictionary containing everything in the class. This is publicly viewable and accessible. Do you notice the problem yet?
Security.
Security. Are these my private variables, accessible through a public method that just gives you the values of the variables? Is this like, okay, it gets worse than this actually. That's a dictionary in the regular sense in Python, so I am able to modify things through it. Right? I can modify the values of the variables in this thing. That's modifying the value of the parameters in the class, including the private members. Oh, and there, see? I made a mistake. I forgot one of the underscores, so it added a new one. See that? So if you, and you know, JavaScript is no better. There you go. I just wrote to a private member from outside of the class with no need for a getter or a setter method.
Impressive.
Right? Now, I keep asking myself this. What's the point of Python? So here's the thing. Here's what it's actually doing under the hood, right? It takes the bleeding private underscored parameter name, and literally all it's doing to make it private is prepending the class name and one underscore character. If you know the name of the class, which you can get by reading it, you have access to all private members' read and write access. And because Python is a dynamically typed language, you can do stuff like this. f._foo __ x is equal to Python is literally the worst language ever. And it just doesn't. So, Python, no concept of privacy, right? They're only pretending to have private variables so that they can fit in with the cool kids. If Python were a person, it would be a 7-year-old girl with makeup and with her mother's makeup and lipstick and high heels on saying, "Look at me, I'm a businesswoman." That's what Python is. "Look at me, I'm a programming language." It's like you're not a programming language, Python. You are an elevated script. You, Python, are an abominated, mutated version of bash scripting, which has been elevated to the level of programming language by knobs. That's what you are. I hate Python so much.
I'm surprised you don't have like a teacher course on like why not take Python and how much maybe.
I would love to do a TED Talk. The TED people, bring me on, I'll give you a talk on why Python is terrible and why you should all stop using it. And it's basically because you don't know what you're talking about. Because you're not actually programmers, admit it. Not like the students watching this, you may or may not be programmers. I'm talking specifically to the TED people. All right. Anyway, thus concludes our Dr. Moore yells at the internet portion of the morning. So JavaScript then. JavaScript as a language is no better than Python, perhaps even worse. Python at least doesn't mess up what double equals means. So, we're going to do some fun stuff today. So last time in class we talked about JavaScript as a language, right? How it stacks up compared to Python, compared to Java. The types of basic expressions and arithmetic that you can do in JavaScript. How the type system sucks. If there's one thing you should take from last week's lecture, it's that the type system is garbage. Java is strong static typing. Python is dynamic typing. JavaScript is garbage typing. All right?
Garbage collecting or garbage typing?
Garbage typing. Garbage typing with a hyphen between. Even C, which is practically absent a type, like C doesn't really have a type checker. Like it's just, like the only reason for types in C is so that you know how big the spots in memory you need for the variables are. Like if the two data types are the same data width, they're equivalent in C. That's a better type system than in JavaScript. No type system is better than to the JavaScript type system. But anyway, so we're going to talk about the document object model. We're going to talk about how to manipulate the elements of a web page using JavaScript. There are a couple of new and interesting features that we're going to talk about. We've sort of done this a little bit already, demonstrations in the first and second week and that sort of thing. Now we're going to sort of drill down into the details and learn this in a practical way that you can actually, have the full features of the language available to you. Okay? So, let's talk about the document object model again. So, wait, this is the exercises. Holy smoke, all right. There we go. All right. Good. So, I have a quarrel with this first section of the slide. I believe that this is a three-step process, not a two-step process, and it's the same three-step process that you guys learned in Python. IPO, right? Input, processing, output. IPO. When you're working with a web page in JavaScript, in order to make any modifications to the elements in the web page, you need references to those elements in the web page, right? If we consider, where's the friggin', there was a picture here. Here we are. Yeah. So, if we consider the document object model, right? We talked about the document object model before. The elements of the web page get loaded into a tree-like structure. You can think of it as a hierarchy of tags, right? All of the tags that you write inside of your HTML file will translate to a node inside of this tree, right? So if you consider this, this simple little HTML on the side here, we've got at the top level a doc type tag and an HTML tag. Inside HTML we have head and body, etc., etc. All of that is reflected inside of the document object model. We have doc type and HTML, we have head and body, those things have their contents, etc., etc. the root node of the tree is called document. Always called document. Document. In if we were to just open up a console here, document, you'll notice the whole thing gets highlighted, right? The document is the entirety of the page, right? Head, HTML, doc type tags, literally the whole thing is document. That's the starting point for the tree. Now, it's useful to review some tree nomenclature here. When we're talking about trees, we borrow nomenclature from family relationships in human families. If a node has subnodes, we call those children, child nodes. If the node is contained within another node, we call that the parent node, right? So the children of body will be H1 and image. The parent of body will be HTML. We extend this analogy slightly. Body and head are sibling nodes within, because they are siblings because they share a common parent, right? And basically, that's like as far as we care to go. Very much as in real life, we don't really care that much about cousins. So that's a joke. It's a more distant relation, right? And we don't really care to talk about aunts or uncles as well. It's rare that like H1, something that's a child of one element will meet like one of its siblings, one of the siblings of one of its parents. That's rare, does happen, but you know, so it goes. So if our means of processing is still input, processing, output, we need to know what our input is and what our output will be, right? Here's a hint, it's not going to be the console, right? Who is, well, it's kind of a silly question. It's such a silly question, I'm not even going to ask the class. The user of a web page is anybody with an internet connection, right? You are not writing web pages for web developers typically, right? Your average person with an internet connection is not going to know what to do with the console, right? Even if they knew how to view the console, it's unlikely they would know anything about what was going on in the console. And you know, given how much use of phones there is these days, you cannot perhaps even guarantee that the end user knows what a right-click menu is. And that sounds funny, but I'm perfectly serious, right? I think it's ridiculous that people come into like a program like this not knowing what a file system is, right? But because everybody's had their brains turned into aspic by mobile phones, you guys aren't actually trained on real computers anymore, and you know the file system is one of those difficult technical details that you know the mobile phones try to hide from you. So if people compute exclusively on mobile phones, they don't even know what a bloody file system is, you know. And you need to know that if you're a programmer. You know, of course, you know, when I'm feeling grumpier, I kind of feel like you shouldn't be allowed to use a computer unless you know how to program it, you know. But there you have it. Anyway, so the output of our JavaScript is DOM manipulation. We want to put something into the web page itself. We're not, last week we were doing all kinds of printing things to consoles. The end user is not going to see that. Console printing is used primarily for like debug information and error messages about the JavaScript. That is developer information, right?
Sir,
Yes.
does HTML support object-oriented programming?
Yes. Yeah, this is kind of the whole point. HTML does not, HTML is not a programming language, even though it's Turing complete, and it is certainly not an object-oriented language. What it is a description of an object. HTML is a description of an object loaded by JavaScript.
Sorry. Can you repeat the last one?
Yeah. So JavaScript is an object-oriented language. The object that it operates on is the DOM. The purpose of HTML is to create the DOM. So this really is a file format for describing the document object model. The purpose of HTML is to describe an object used in JavaScript.
So in this case, every time we use our object itself,
Every time you use the object, which, sorry?
every time we use a tag in HTML, this object itself.
Yes. Every tag that you use in HTML is itself a sub-object within the document object model. Each one of these is an object, right?
Right.
So, every time you use a tag, you are creating an object, right? These objects have attributes and methods, right? ID equals message sets the ID attribute of the H1 object in the DOM to the value message. Does that make sense? So, when you boil this down, what you get is basically a bunch of Java-style instance variables, right? Along with associated methods, right? The correct way to think about any particular attribute is the same way you think about an instance variable in Java. In fact, they'll even call these instance variables in the slides every once in a while. That was a good question, thank you. So, so good. CSS is not an object itself. It's a means of applying attributes to objects. Yeah. Was that your question?
I didn't have a question.
Oh, all right. So, given that our input and our output are both coming from the document object model, in order to work with the document object model, we need references to these objects. This is the same process as creating a new object in Java, except we're not creating the object, that's created by the HTML. What we're doing is grabbing references to existing objects. Now, the document itself, right, the root node, always has a fixed name. It's always called document, so you always know where to start. In theory, you could access each one of these elements by just walking the tree down, following parent to child, all the way down until you find the particular element you're looking for, right? But this is tedious, time-consuming, and bad programming because if you bake that into your JavaScript, if your HTML page changes in any way, it's very likely to break your JavaScript. And that's like a situation you want to avoid, right? You want to avoid cases where, you know, some person who works on the HTML can break your whole JavaScript, right? You want to avoid that. We want robustness. The more common approach is to perform a search operation on the DOM to pick out the references to the elements we want to modify, right? There are two primary methods. Well, we're going to talk about three of them. One, we're going to talk about and not use. Two, we're going to talk about and use. The one that we're not going to use is called getElementById. How many people have done some JavaScript in the past? Yeah, okay.
Last week.
Last week, right, yeah. Fair enough. GetElementById is, that's like the old school way of doing it. It used to be that if you wanted to grab a reference to an element in the HTML, you gave that element an ID number, or an ID string, and then you searched for that string using getElementById. This is a less flexible approach. GetElementById will always only return one element, right? Because, why? Why will it always only return one element?
Because IDs are unique.
There we go. Unique IDs. Therefore, this thing can always only return one thing. You will still see this quite frequently because, you know, programmers of a particular age are going to be using that, right? Because that's what they're used to. Since a great deal of what you will likely be doing in your work lives is servicing existing web pages rather than writing them from scratch, you have to know how code used to be written too. But this is generally increasingly falling out of favor because it's not as flexible. The modern approach is to use query selector. The query selector method allows you to use general CSS queries, CSS selectors, to grab anything in your web page, right? So the same mechanism which CSS uses can be used in JavaScript as well. Now, this may produce a problem in your brain. You may be saying, okay, but can that not return multiple elements? And the answer is yes. You absolutely can write a CSS selector to grab multiple elements. That's kind of the point, right? So, in JavaScript, we have two methods, query selector and query selector all. Query selector will select the first occurrence of something matching your CSS selection, your CSS selector. Query selector all will give you a list of references to all elements that match that query. Make sense?
Can you repeat again for the query selector?
Sure thing. Query selector grabs one reference. It always only returns one reference, and it's a reference to the first element matching the selector. Query selector all returns a list of references to all elements matching the selector. Make sense? Would you like to see a technical demonstration?
Yes.
So let's load Wikipedia. Today's featured article is Science Fiction Adventures, the 1958 magazine. Wow. I love it. I love old science fiction. Just a personal note. Anyway. So if you take a look inside of the sort of elements of this page, you'll see you have a lot of divs and a lot of classes. There's an ID. Vector top table of contents collapsed checkbox. Okay. So that's rather long, but we'll see if I'm going to have to write that down. It's vector dash toc dash collapsed checkbox. That's a long ID. Holy smoke.
There's a shorter one just below that in the nav.
Oh. Well, I wrote it down already, so whatever. So, the way that you search all of these things is through the document, the root node, right? Because you're searching the DOM. So you need a link to the DOM. Document dot get element by ID. And then you provide the name of the element. Vector dash toc dash collapsed dash checkbox. And there you can see we have succeeded. The way that the console tells you whether or not you've succeeded is by basically echoing the HTML tag of the item that you've selected, right? Now, it's one thing to create a reference, it's another one to store it, right? Ordinarily, we want to refer to these references multiple times. Performing the search operation multiple times is inefficient. This is what variables are for, right? So, we might let our reference equal this thing, then our reference is a reference to that object. Does that make sense? Good. Once we get to selecting multiple, that part isn't going to be that's not going to be so much of an option. Although, in theory, it could still be. But anyway, so we can grab a reference to an item, right? Normally, if you hover over, it'll show you where it is in the page, but I don't see it anywhere, so whatever. So that's the old way. The new way is to use query selector and then indicate that this is a ID with the octothorpe character. You can see that the results are precisely and exactly the same in both cases. Is this big enough to be seen at the back? Okay. Now, so if all you're doing is selecting an ID, these two calls are going to operate exactly the same way anyway, so it doesn't really matter what you use, though you should use query selector because it's the more modern approach, right? Where query selector really comes into it is when you start doing non-IDs, right? So for example, P for paragraph. We can set CSS properties fairly easily by accessing the style attribute and then selecting the CSS property we want to modify. I'm just doing this quickly so we can like highlight it. Hopefully it's somewhere in this. Okay, so the first paragraph doesn't really exist then, which, you know, you might get empty elf, that might be an indication. I'll do this again on my own example and it will actually show up. I'd like to do query selector all though, all right? So query selector all will grab references to all paragraph items in this article. You can see we have a node list of eight paragraphs, right? If we save that to a variable, let nodes equal query selector all p, then say nodes at 3 dot style dot background color is equal to blue. There you go. Paragraph 3 has its background color set. And only paragraph 3. But I've got references to all the rest of them, right? So that's your advantage for using query selector all. You can, you know, rather than operate on one element at a time, you can use loops to operate on many elements at a time. This is a more programmatic way of approaching things. Make sense so far? Good. So this kind of, this brings us into the idea of changing content, right? So the structure of the DOM itself does not give you much in terms of web page content. I'm sure everybody here knows that you can have as many divs as you want, but if there's no actual written text on the page, you're not going to get any marks for it, right? The content is to some degree separate from, like, it's embedded in the DOM, but it's a property of the DOM, not the DOM itself, right? So, one of the most important properties that we'll be talking about in this course is the inner HTML property. Inner HTML is the contents of the tag as a string, right? So, let's load up VS Code and we'll do a quick example. Let's see, DOM stuff, HTML. So, very quick, let's just give this a little bit of content. H1, Just, you know, some content. No, not there we go. So, let's talk about the H1 heading to start off with. Document dot query selector H1. You'll notice that when it's not Wikipedia, it like nicely highlights the thing you've selected, you know? If we ask for the inner HTML property of that, you will see that the inner HTML property is exactly equal to the contents of the tag. It's literally every character in the file between the end of this tag and the beginning of the ending tag, right? Including spaces. So, for example, if I grab the div, right, the inner HTML of the div is all of these paragraphs. Did I misspell neither? I think I misspelled neither. Give me a second. There we go. It's literally that string, including spacing for the indentation and new line characters. So, any two spaces after the period, folks, in this classroom? Anybody who's like, there should be two spaces after a period when you're writing? No?
One.
Do they not teach you people how to write anymore?
One space.
Two
My
spaces.
mom says two.
Yes. Well, that's the older and more formal way of writing. The reason that you should put two spaces after a period is that it gives the sentences themselves slightly more separation, makes it easier to read. Check any printed text. I guarantee you, like a book that's been published is going to use two spaces after the period most of the time. Let me just see here. No, not in this case. Anyway, there's this crowd of people who are like, oh, you should only put one space after the period, and they're like, you know, terrible people like it, but influential, just like the people in the government. Ha ha ha. Anyway, white space is consumed in HTML, right? All of these new lines and all of these spaces don't actually enter into your final web page. The interpreter just gobbles them up, and it puts the number of spaces you want in based on the words, not on the actual spaces you type. Like, you could do something like that, right? Doesn't actually show up on your HTML, right? So,
Excuse me.
yes,
So why does it put the new line on?
because there's one in the document. Where's my inspector window? There we go. Oh my God. Console. There we go. All right. So, what's the first character after this div tag? Whoop, new line. And then the spacing. New line, spacing, then the first paragraph. So it's literally the contents of the file as a string, right? So that's what inner HTML is, right? But the interesting thing about it is, it can itself contain HTML tags, as in this case. This is not the preferred way of doing things. We will, in a number of, like, I think after the break, we will be talking about, well, I won't, whoever you have after me, we'll be talking about using methods to add elements to the DOM as children, deleting elements, you know, using methods to do this, which is more, that's better, especially for, you know, things that are slightly more complicated than paragraphs, right? But you can add new DOM elements by adding them to the inner HTML of existing DOM elements. You can delete DOM elements by deleting the contents of the tag through inner HTML. So, for example, yes?
So by using the term DOM element, you are referring to tags, right?
Say again?
By referring to DOM elements, you are referring to tags.
Yes. Yeah, HTML elements are DOM elements, or DOM objects. Yeah. So, you actually have write permissions on these. Boom, it's gone. So, if I query select the div, entered HTML, set it to an empty string, it gets rid of it. It no longer has any content. If I want to change it to, you know, a button that says button, and button, I have put in a button that says button. Very cool, right? You can, so basically anytime you have a reference to a DOM element, you have the ability to change its contents, including manipulation of the structure of the DOM itself by being able to, you know, add or delete nodes. Yes?
So when you do this, does this alter the HTML document as well and just change it to button?
No, the source code itself does not change, and if you reload the page, all changes are destroyed. This is like, and this is true of everything JavaScript does. It only affects how things are viewed on the client. It's client-side programming, right? The HTML source code file will be on the server, right? Yeah, my God, if it was that simple to modify an HTML page on a server, there would be no internet. We would just have anarchy, you know. But yeah. So you can do all kinds of interesting things like this. For example, we haven't quite covered how to do this yet, but nodes dot for each. I'm gonna teach you this in a little bit. I just want to do it as a demonstration. For each, we node dot inner HTML is equal to Microsoft sucks. There you go. Ta-da! Right? So that's fun, right? But you can do more than just that. Let's imagine that instead of, and I'm just gonna do this in one line. Wait, I need one thing first. Bear with me, all right? All right. No, I need a RickRoll. Come on. I need a website. Okay, that'll do. That'll do. That's a link. Copy link. Okay. All right. Yes, this is happening. So, query selector all. We've done paragraphs, right? But what if we were to grab links? Ooh, select all links for each link. Arrow function, node dot href is equal to, and then I paste that. All right. Wait, that might not, I think that let nodes is gonna interfere with me here. There we go. And now, if everything has been hooked up correctly, all links on the page are now a RickRoll. And like literally all links on that page, except I didn't do the smart thing, which was to like open a new tab. So now I had to refresh the page, so all my RickRolls are gone. But I should be able to get it through browser history. There we go. Yeah. That's a RickRoll. John Carnell is a RickRoll. Robert Silverberg is a RickRoll. Everything is a RickRoll. Right? Please don't use this for malicious stuff, and if you do, don't send it to me. Yes?
Sorry, are you able to target only one link or has to be all of them?
Yeah, absolutely. You can target one link. You just have to know which link you want to target. So the for each basically works kind of like the for loop in Python, right? It'll just take every node in the list of nodes that's being generated and like run this for it. But yeah, you can absolutely just do one if you want. Just set it to a variable, right? And then like nodes at 5.href is equal to, you know, that. There you go. Now, whichever link is the 5th link on this page will have the RickRoll. I don't know which link would be the 5th one, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's unlikely to be this one, but let's try it. Hey, it was actually. There you go. Unless this is still, I haven't reloaded and yeah, it's all still. Okay. Reload, try it again. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, you can just hover over it to see what the link is. So, you know, that's not going to work. It's fine. That's probably a link too. Anyway, knowing which link it is on a page like this is non-trivial, you know? Like, you can modify a link, but which link is the link you have the reference to, you know? I mean, there are ways of telling, right? You could say something like, all right, let me test. Node.
I think it's going to be infinities.
Nodes, not node.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if you take a look, the 5th one is actually about Wikipedia, right? You can read the contents of these links to find out what's inside of them, but this is less useful in a programming context, right? In theory, you could do like regex matching for a particular word you're looking for, but, you know, community portal, Wikipedia has a lot of links, contributions. 59. Mike Ashley. There we go. Mike Ashley. But Mike Ashley is probably linked many times in this document, so which link is that we're now talking about? You see what I mean? Like, there is a reason to use IDs, particularly when your page gets large like this, right? So, like, as you might expect, query selector all is primarily for applying global properties to everything, and query selector individual is for performing individual modifications, like on one element. Make sense? Good. Any other questions?
Can
Good.
we save the changes on web page?
Can we see which?
Save the changes on web page.
Yeah, you can. You don't have to modify invisible properties. You can also modify visible properties. For example, let's say I'm query selecting all paragraphs, and I'm going to modify the style.color to green. Turns all the text green, but only in paragraphs. Right? So, like, this is not in a paragraph. It's an interesting thing, you can tell what's in a paragraph and what isn't. But, any questions? So, what I want all of you to do tonight, all right, if you live with someone, if you have a roommate or a significant other, if they leave a browser window open, I want you to RickRoll them, okay? That's your homework. Go RickRoll your significant other. Just say your prof told you to for practice. Another good one is like just leaving them an alert box that like says something like, I'm watching you, your real name, right? Yeah. Bill Gates is watching you through your webcam, Amanda, you know. Yeah. Or like the NSA says hi. You know. Really, I'm advocating for being mischievous. Everyone should try being mischievous. Anyway, so, so getting back to the nuts and bolts, there's like a huge number of these properties. Literally all of the attributes you've used in HTML and CSS so far are baked into the DOM in one way or another. Sometimes they've been slightly modified. One example is CSS properties. So in CSS, you access background-color. If you tried to access background-color in JavaScript, what does hyphen mean in JavaScript?
Space.
Nope, it's not space.
What's the word, sir?
What does hyphen mean in JavaScript? Who said it?
Instance?
Hmm?
Joe said it. You say separation?
What did you say?
Subtraction, that's what Joe said.
Yes, correct. Subtraction. The hyphen is the minus sign in JavaScript. It's the subtraction operator. If you tried to say background, oh, this is a horrible marker. Background-color in JavaScript, what you'd end up with is background minus color, which is obvious nonsense. So, the way that JavaScript solves this problem, we use what's called camel case instead of dashes to access CSS properties. Otherwise, the names remain unchanged. So, background color, background hyphen color, becomes background color with a capital C. The way that camel case works, the first word, so it's for multiple words, the first word is not capitalized, and every subsequent word is capitalized, and you don't have any space characters or any word separation characters. The new capital indicates the beginning of the next word. I tend to personally prefer camel case for like everything. Variable names. I will, like, the alternative is to use underscores, and I don't know, use underscores if you really want to, but I think camel case looks nicer, you know? Good. So literally all of your CSS style properties can be modified at the JavaScript level. One thing though, here's a gotcha. Do you remember that thing that where I was showing you Python, and like where I misspelled a attribute name and just created a new attribute with that misspelled name? Well, unfortunately, JavaScript does the same thing. JavaScript will not give you an error if you misspell an attribute name. It will just create it for you. So, for example, if I wanted to say, for each node, node.inner HTML is equal to, you know, yes. You'll see that the inner HTML, it didn't do anything, right? The reason is because that the H, the T, the M, and the L need to be capitalized in order for it to be the correct tag, right? So, first of all, if you change it this way, then it works. And secondly, if you grab any one of these, you'll see that the autocomplete thinks there are two different inner HTMLs for it. This is true. It now has both the inner HTML capitalized property, which is the one that you think it is, and then it also has this lowercase inner HTML, which is the value that was set. Now, unfortunately, in this example, I set them both to the same thing, so it's not as effective, but there you go. It picks up the value that was written to that identifier. So that would be an error in Java, right? If you misspelled the attribute name, Java would say, that doesn't exist, go make it exist, and then come back to me if you want it run. In JavaScript, it was like, yes sir, please sir, absolutely sir. Doesn't exist, but I'll make it for you, sir. So yeah, basically. So be careful with how you name things. This is like a common noob trap, right? Particularly if you're not great at having consistent variable names in your code already, right? If that's like a problem that you often have with Java, that like you'll spell your variable one way at the top and another way at the bottom, JavaScript is just gonna put you through a meat grinder. See, and not to harp on it too much, but this is kind of like my whole problem with languages like this, like Python and JavaScript. They pretend to be user-friendly by being more flexible, but they actually require more effort to program in than stricter languages, because you have to keep on top of stuff like that. But anyway. If I had a penny for every badly written JavaScript line of JavaScript code. But anyway. So, good. So let's talk about an exercise then. I think we've got enough now. First, you guys remember the hello, goodbye example we did last time? If you saved that example, then you don't have to rewrite an if statement. If you didn't, you'll have to rewrite an if statement and a loop as well. So, create a new HTML page, load a JavaScript file into it using a script element. The script should contain a function, hello, which takes a parameter n. Rather than writing hello and goodbye to console, you will write them to the web page instead. All right? This means you need to construct the web page in such a way that there's a place for it to be put. Right? So, yeah, other than that, if it's even, say hello n times. If it's odd, say goodbye once. Same as last week. And yeah, we'll take the next 10-15 minutes and we'll do that. Sound good? Good. There's also a second bit where you retrieve all of the paragraph elements on the page and do something to them. We'll do the first part and then I'll show you looping and stuff, and then we'll do the second part. Okay? Good. Okay.
Or anime.
Places, please.
Zoro.2 is streaming this one. Don't use this one.
You
Use
guys
the
know
San
you're
Diego-
like you guys are being picked up by the camera more than anybody, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. That's the awesome responsibility of sitting next to the camera, right? You guys are going to be the loudest, even louder than me. Yes, let's do this. So I am just going to delete the contents of this div. I'll just give it an ID, because why not? Output. And I'm going to embed the script. Script source is equal to examples.js. Remember the super quick and easy way of making that file in VS Code. If you control click the file name, it says unable to open. Could not be opened because the file was not found. Create file. Boom. You have it, and it's in the correct directory. So, next, we write the hello function. Function, hello, takes n. If n is even or odd, we do different stuff. If n mod 2 is equal to 0, do one thing, else do another. If it's even, we want to do something n times. We write a quick for loop. For let I equal 0, I is less than n, I plus plus. We do something. Now the question is, what do we do? In both cases, we're going to need a reference to the DOM element that we are manipulating, in this case, that div. So it makes sense to grab the reference first. I always recommend grabbing the reference first. So let div ref equal document dot query selector. What the heck did I call the thing? I always forget. Output. Now, I saw a lot of people doing something like this. Div ref is dot inner HTML is equal to hello world. And this one is correspondingly goodbye world. Right? If you run that, you get goodbye world, but if you run it for even, you get only one hello world. Here's what's happening. This thing is being rewritten each time the loop executes, right? The contents, the inner HTML contents of the div tag are being overwritten every time you perform that operation. So, what you actually want to do is plus equals, which for strings means concatenation. Now, this is a better but still not correct solution. It needs to be in a paragraph tag. That's right, folks. You can put the tags directly into the strings that you're writing to inner HTML. That's kind of the whole point, actually. There you go. There you have it. Make sense? Now, one quick point about efficiency. Every time you write to the inner HTML of a DOM element, the browser has to re-render the whole web page. Right? Re-rendering the web page can be that can consume a lot of resources depending on how large the web page is, what its contents are, how much programming it takes to calculate what the contents should be, etc., right? So, the fewer of these operations you have, the more efficient your web page will be. So, we can make this slightly more efficient by keeping a let out empty string variable. We keep an output variable. Also there's a bug in here that I want to show you. So we have goodbye world, right? If we then print 4 on top of that, we get the hello worlds after the goodbye world because we're just appending to the contents here, not overwriting it, right? So we can produce as many hello worlds as we want. That's a bug. That's a bug. We need to clear the contents first. So we can say out plus equals this string that we're trying to write. And then we write out. Now it works as we expect. Make sense? We also wanted to style hello green and goodbye red. That is QED, quite easily done. After we write the inner HTML, we can just say divref style.color is equal, not computed style map, thank you, style. No, divref dot style dot color is equal to green and red. There you go, green and red. Good. So, so that's the solution to the first part anyway. Make sense? Take the pictures with your phone now, please. So, you know, I had to. So I'd like to talk about assignment 2 now.
Fine. That's what we like waiting for.
The moment we've all been waiting for. So this is what the structure of assignment 2 is. You have a series of programming problems in JavaScript, all right? Each one of these will require a JavaScript function, right? You'll have to write a function for each of the programming problems. And then you take all of these problems and you put them into a website using one of the Bootstrap JavaScript components. Similar to Carousel, but not the same thing as Carousel. So, the JavaScript Bootstrap components, which you are recommended to use, are accordion, collapse, modal, popover, scrolls by, and toasts. So, for example, if I were to just take a look at toasts, right? A toast component is like an alert box that is only shown for a couple of seconds when something happens. So it's like toast from a toaster. It pops up, you know. So you can close a toast, right? So basically, if you take a look at the structure of this thing, the contents of the toast, you've got the toast header and you've got a toast body, both of which are divs. So you just put all of the HTML for a question inside of the div here, where it says some text inside the toast body. Like, you can put more than just paragraphs in there, obviously, right? You put that in, and you have like you have one toast for every question, and then that's the assignment, right? That's, in terms of the website laid out, that's what it's expected to do. I think there's like a header as well, but like, if you guys can't write a header by now, you know, quit. Well, I didn't say it, but you know. So, does that make sense? Is it clear, like, where you're putting your HTML? Good. This is like one of the only times I'm like, yes, please copy off the internet. So, to the programming problems themselves. Where are we here? Yes. The next thing we're going, so in terms of the lesson, we've talked about putting outputs to a web page. The next thing we're going to talk about is taking inputs from a web page, right? Now, can anybody guess what type of HTML element we are likely going to use to take inputs from people?
An input?
An input element, absolutely, yes. We're actually not going to put them in forms. The reason we're not putting them in a form is because the part where when you press enter it generates a reload or a request or something like that, that's attached to the form element, not the individual input elements. So you can get the input without having to like generate an HTTP request if you just leave them outside of a form. So that's actually like the way we're going to primarily do things in JavaScript, since we want the input, those input elements for input to our JavaScript, not for generating like post or get requests. Yeah?
Yes.
Good. Yeah. So, there are requirements for what the inputs should be and how to hook them up with functions. We're going to talk about that during the lesson in just a little bit. Basically, these are the problems. So there are 8 problems in total, divided into 3 categories, and you only have to do 5 of them. So you have group 1, which are like baby's first programming questions. You must do 2 out of 3 of these. You can see they're like really simple things like read the input from a document and interpret it as the length of the side of a square, output perimeter and area. So, you know, that should be well within the capability of everybody in this room. Group 2 are slightly more difficult. These are the medium strength questions. 3 questions, pick 2. These are questions that may involve a loop, for instance. Then you have group 3, the toughies, the slightly harder questions. Yeah, pick one of those and do that. So basically, for each one of these questions, you will have a separate input and a separate input and output box inside of one of your JavaScript elements. I did toasts, but like accordion is the one that people do a lot because it's the first in the list. You know, it doesn't matter which one you do. As long as you hook it up correctly, it doesn't matter which one you do, right? Making sense so far?
Yes.
Good. Any questions about any of that? It doesn't have to necessarily look nice. Although you are making a web page, you do not have to create any content. All right? So there does not have to be, like, if this web page contains a single paragraph element, you're probably doing it wrong. All right? Like, maybe, like, with a footer and a copyright thing at the bottom, you could have one, but, like, if you're, like, if you're sitting at your computer, like, writing a paragraph, that is not the purpose of this assignment, and that will not be the purpose of any assignment in this course for the rest of the course. All right? So, in particular, I don't want anybody copying any content off of Wikipedia and sticking it in there, like I had last semester. All right? Any questions? Good. Yes.
Will you give us a few days to upload it to CS Unix?
Yeah.
Like a week? Okay.
Yeah. Same 1 week thing applies. So if you can't get the VPN working and you upload to Canvas over the weekend and you're not at school, you have some time to get it up to CS Unix. And I am working on marking your assignments. I am doing it. I just have a lot of in-class time this semester. Yes?
One thing I just want to know about that, so when we upload the files to my Canva, we're just doing the files itself separately as a dot.
.txt, yeah.
And then when we upload it to CS Unix, it's all together in one file, for the most part?
No, you take it and you put it inside, so
It's just the HTML document itself?
yeah, so public HTML /private /10259 /A1 or A2, whichever the assignment is, right? Inside of that, you should have index.html, page2.html, in that case, assign1.css, and then like, you know, .jpeg, you know.
So 4 separate,
Yeah, the files in the server are just the files.
just the files.
If you upload it to a zip file on the server doesn't know where to display a web page from. You don't have to worry about uploading things compressed to the server. The server will compress things before it marshals it into internet packets. It sends it off through the internet. It's decompressed on your computer. The internet infrastructure takes care of compressing your data for you. All you have to do is upload it as files.
Okay.
Any other questions? I mean, surely you guys didn't think that they sent like raw bitmaps through the internet these days. Sometimes it's like talking to a brick wall. So, anyway, that was a little mean, I apologize.
Well, look at it.
For all you Zoomers in the crowd, a bitmap is an image file where each pixel in the image is a separate color value in a giant array. That's what a bitmap is. It's a desperately uncompressed data format. They occupy huge swaths of memory, and the only people who use it right now are photographers, that's like what their very fancy cameras output, because they absolutely can't have any image compression, you know. Anyway, holy crap. I knew these markers were crap, but holy smoke. I literally just clapped my hands and the top popped off the marker.
That's why they call them magic markers.
Beautiful.
That's how you do the camera.
And of course I got it all over my fingers.
This class is a mess.
I mean, what did you expect, you know? It's me, you know? Okay, so. 2 things to cover before we get out of here. He says 40 minutes remaining in the class. We need to talk about input elements and how to get stuff out of them. And we need to go over how to do looping, because I kind of showed you, but I didn't explain it. So, what do you want to do first, input elements or looping?
Looping.
Okay, let's loop. So, let's make a new function, mod all, that will modify all paragraph elements. We grab the multiple references using query selector all. We've all been doing this so far. Document.query selector all. Let's grab, careful folks, all paragraph elements. Save that to a variable called nodes. Doesn't have to be called nodes, but, you know, there you go. So, this is now a list. If you say nodes.innerHTML, it doesn't exist. It's a list of nodes, not an individual node. To perform this operation, you need to modify the property of each node in sequence, right?
Is it a list because of the query selector all method?
Yes. Query selector all always returns a list, even if it only finds one element.
Gotcha.
And I think if it finds no elements, it returns an empty list.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, there are a couple of approaches here. One is our for loop from Java, right? We were doing arrays on Monday. This is going to look familiar. For let I equal 0, I is less than nodes.length, I plus plus. And then you perform your operation on each node. So nodes at I dot style dot order. No, let's not be fancy. Fanciness will just get us in trouble. Khaki. Terrible color for font. Let's go for it. So, going back to our document, if we say hello, 8, right? And then mod all, you can see that all of the, they call that khaki?
It's like yellow.
Yeah, I always thought khaki was like more of a greenish, you know, like a very soft green. Anyway, maybe it's just the display. So that has modified all properties, right? If you want to like slow it down and watch what's going on, you can. It's just a way of like slowing it down because the alert will pop up between each. Right? Click me. Okay. Oh wait. Okay. So it's not going to re-render until it.
Excuse me.
Okay. I thought so. It's going to wait till it waits till the function is over to re-render the page. So.
Will you like set intervals?
Yeah, you could also wire it up to set interval. Yeah. Although that wouldn't be easy.
Okay.
There are ways of making it go one at a time, whatever. So that's number one. This is like your basic. This is your basic version that will always work. This is the non-fancy always work version, and probably the preferred version for many people in the class. Because reliability is important. Anyway, another way of doing this is similar to the quote-unquote enhanced for loop in Java, which we talked about. It's, in JavaScript, a method of the list data type. So, nodes.forEach. Nodes.forEach accepts a function taking one argument. It passes into that function each of the elements in the list in turn. So, function takes a node, node.inner HTML is equal to for each loops top. And I'm going to change this to something readable. you go. For each loops. So that has the same effect. Structurally, this is what's happening. So in comparison to a Java for each loop, Java for each loop for int I in list do stuff, right? So instead of running through this list, running this loop a number of times equal to the size of the list, assigning each loop element to this temporary variable each time, the approach here is we run through this list, right? We run through every element of this list, passing each element to the specified function, right? So this is an anonymous function which takes a single argument called node, right? So you know, if this were like a physical analogy might be useful here. If we had this list in JavaScript and we had a function that was like taking n, you know, and returning n times 2, right? The return values aren't even used here, like the return value just disappears. You would have to do something else with it, right? But it first takes the first element, uses that here and calls f, then it moves to the next element, uses this, calls f with it, goes to the next element, uses this, calls f with it, etc., etc. That's how it works. Make sense? So, question? Where? Yes. Can I do what? I need to teach. So this is a little bit clunky. There's a shortened syntax for this same thing, which how many people have heard of a lambda function? Yeah, a few people. This is basically, this is going to be similar to lambda syntax in other languages, but it's, again, exactly equivalent. Nodes dot for each node arrow. They call them arrow functions, but they are lambdas. Node dot style dot background color is equal to khaki. Now, one advantage over this is you don't need the curly braces. Function node goes away. You just specify what the input parameter is, arrow, and then what you want to do to it. Yes. I only recommend these for single line functions. Yes.
When I put that in my code, it changes the thing, but when it's like, let's say you have 8 hello worlds, and then when you put in mod all, it just puts one of the for each loops thing. Like it doesn't change every single one, it just puts it into one.
Are you using query selector or query selector all?
Query selector all.
Mm-hmm. I will take a look after class because I absolutely need to show you guys how inputs work before we break for today. Okay. All right. So let me just run this to prove that it works. And there you go. Khaki background. Good. And, you know, I would argue that this is like more readable as well. You know, that kind of looks nice. I recommend these where possible, but again, if this is going to be more than one line, might as well do this, right? Get the indentation in there. Any questions about loops? These things apply to all lists in JavaScript, not just those generated by query selector all, although query selector all will be a major source of lists in this class. Make sense?
Affirmative.
Excellent. So, now let's talk about inputs. So, going back to our assignment, this paragraph right here, the first paragraph on page 2, this is the most important paragraph in the assignment. A great deal of the marks for the assignment are for being compliant with this paragraph specifically. All right? So, the content of each of your chosen components, similar to the slide on the carousel, will be to output a programming problem that you have solved in JavaScript. Each of these containers should have an input element and a text area. The text area must have the attribute read-only and will be used for your solution output. You should give them ID attributes to make selecting them with JavaScript simpler. Simple patterns like ID equals, blah, blah, blah. Each input element should have an onChange attribute that corresponds to the function you create. Do not put your inputs inside of a form. This will mean that when you press enter, if you press enter, it won't reload the page. So let's take a look at this. So our input, shall we say, so we're going to have two input elements, right? One is a regular text box input. So input type equals text. Then we have input type equals text area, I think.
So you can use text as attribute.
Oh, you can, is it like text area like this? Yeah, okay, there you go. And I think inputs are self-closing, am I correct? Buttons aren't, but these things are, I think. No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, okay.
Confirmed by W3.
Oh, excellent. W3 schools keeping me honest. So, you want to give both of these things IDs so we can snatch the references in JavaScript. You want to call it, question X input. Call this one question X output. Now, let's just take a look at our document, see what we get. There we go. Aha! Text area. And of course that looks terrible. So, even though this is technically a sin worse than any of the sins in the Bible, use a break.
Or you can use div, it will just separate it.
Yeah, you can use a different div for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like in the assignment, it's all going in one div. Although you could put like divs within the div.
Yeah,
But
you can.
I don't know. It's just one tiny break statement. What could go wrong? You know. There you go. Gets attacked by a velociraptor. So basically, the next thing to do is to write your function that does the problem, right? I'm going to choose an extremely simple problem. I'm not going to solve one of your assignment problems for you, although I could easily in about 10 seconds for some of them. Come on, it's like one if statement, that first one. Seriously, it's one if statement. Yeah, humble brag. I'm just going to do this in script or example. Yeah, that'll do. Function question x takes a number or takes something. Actually, it takes nothing. All right. The purpose of this will be to takes input from text box and outputs thrice that value. So I P O to take the input. The first thing to do is to grab the references. Grab references first. So let input ref equal document dot query selector question x input. Did I put an underscore? I did. There we go. Output ref question x output. So if I may make a brief, if I may say briefly, very briefly, because JavaScript is a language which has basically no type system and it's very terrible, it's not going to help you at all remember what types your variables are. So it's very useful to put that information inside the variable name itself. If it's supposed to be an integer, put integer in the variable name. If it's supposed to be a reference, put reference in the variable name. This is like a mental hygiene thing. All right, it will help. Just I know it's extra writing, but it will help. So, next, we want to grab the actual input from the actual text box, right? So, let value or input val equal input reference dot. Now, here's a question. How do you get the inside of a text box? What's the attribute name? Value.
Nice day.
Input ref dot value. Now, just for testing purposes, let us log that to console. See what we're actually getting. My recommendation is that you stop every 3 lines of code and run the thing you've written. Test early, test often, test it even if it's incomplete. So, let's load this bad boy up. Let's put something in here. Or we are expecting a number, so let's put a number in. What do we call this? Question X. See, we're already running into issues. Cannot read property of null, reading value. So this is somehow returning us a null reference. Oh!
Do you need a
I do. There we go. See? Test early, test often. There's no such thing as a QX input HTML tag. Certainly not in our page. You could get such a thing in XML, but not in HTML. There we go. It's undefined. Terrible. All right. Oh yeah, because there's nothing in it. That makes sense actually. 777. 777. Now here's a question. Is it a string or is it a number?
It's a number.
Are you sure?
Or whatever the input would be.
It's a string. It's a string.
Here's a question. If we log input val plus 1, what are we going to get?
Here. Type in.
Just ignore.
777.
Oh, oh yeah, I have to. Here we go.
Concatenation.
Concatenation. That's right. So 777 is being read as a string out of the text box. All inputs, all things that are in text boxes are strings. So if we want to do any math on it, which in this case, we want to do some math on it, you have to convert it to an integer. So input val is actually number dot parse int. You could do float as well, but I don't care. Int is enough, right? There we go. Now we can do math, right? In this case, our processing is very, very simple. Input val times equals 3, right? Your processing step for your functions on the assignment will be typically more involved than a single assignment statement. And then we output. We have our output reference already. Output reference dot. Now, what are we modifying here for a text area? Someone's going to have to look it up. Is it going to be value? We'll find out.
Oh, it's inner HTML.
Really?
Because it's within the opening and closing tag of the text area is the content.
Okay, I want to see what it does if I give it value though. Let me see. Oh, value still works.
All right.
There you go. Inner HTML works too. See, always there's like a million ways to do anything, right? So, so that is the function finished, right? We have performed the calculation, we take the input, we process, we produce the output, right? But there's one more component here that's missing. Next week we are going to be talking about event handlers in more detail, but we kind of need to get slightly into event handlers even right now. So an event handler is an object that listens for a particular event to happen and then executes a function when it detects that event happens. The timers that we've been working with so far are event handlers, but the thing they're watching is the clock, right? We can also have individual DOM elements wait for particular things like mouse events, or as we're going to see here, wait for the input box to have changed. So, the sort of the poor man's way of doing this, which is not as good, is to set the onChange attribute. The onChange attribute, when given a function name for a function defined in JavaScript, will call that function when the change event happens for that input element. So, onChange function name is question X. You have to put the round braces in there. There we go. And then, rather than having to call the function from the console, it's now called automatically whenever anybody is finished changing the text box. There's another one you can do that that runs the function as you're entering text. I forget the name of it, but okay. Has anybody ever been filling out a web form and you're filling in you're filling out a phone number and it automatically inserts the braces and the dashes?
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
That's how they do it,
Cool.
right? Using JavaScript, but on change of each individual character. So that's also one of the ways you prevent people from entering bad characters. So yeah, number. This is the expected behavior of your assignment. Make sense?
Can you show the code?
Yeah, I'll show you the code. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe it should be split up, down. Yeah, there you go. I have framed it so that if you want to take a picture. Question?
Is it correct for it only to change once you click off or click enter?
Yes.
It's not to change right once you type it?
Correct. That's a different event. I forgot what the name of that event is.
Making sure my code is wrong.
Yeah. But yeah, question? You would like me to come look at your screen? I imagine there are quite a few people watching. Try saving the board. Oh, you're missing braces. Round braces right there. Yes. Show me your code. Yes. So that sometimes happens if your these guys didn't find anything.
Yeah.
It's not being used. It says it's not being used. Oh.
You try create selector all.
Ow. There you go.
No, not all. What's the difference?
What's it?
Yeah.
It's like more like,
Oh, yeah.
it's like a sentence like,
I have a,
like,
I would say
No.
let out.
I have like, I have that in the last set of information, approximate.
oh, yeah.
Avoiding.
Oh, this one.
Spelling.
Like to me is a filler. Same thing as I say.
On key press. Ah! I'll try that. Yeah, okay. All right. Here we go. On key press.
One button, one click.
Why is 4 not a number?
Good question.
4 is a number!
No way.
There we go.
Oh, you know what it is? It's probably taking the previous value. Yeah, look, interesting.
A number.
Yeah,
Wait, what?
That is
okay.
interesting.
On change is taking the string that was previously. It's not taking the updated value that's like the delay between the key being pressed and the value field being updated is long enough. So what you want is key up, not on key press. You want on key up. When someone releases the key. Let's try that. See, I hold the key, and then it releases. There you go. Yeah, code.
Yeah, on key up is working.
On key up. If you want to use on key up instead of on change, that's fine. They're both like equivalent. So, you know. The thing I don't want to see is people hooking it up to buttons. Okay? But while we're on the subject, if you put a button in, right?
So it's
You can set an on-click parameter here as well, right? You can also set on-click parameters on things that you wouldn't expect, like headings. Basically, anything can have an on-click. Call hello with 5. On-click, call hello with 1. So, click me, hello with 1. Click the heading, come on. Might have to be something with a background or borders, like a div. Yeah. Maybe if I move this here, let's see here. Goodbye world.
But that only works once.
Oh, no, it'll work. Hello, goodbye. Oh, yeah, hey, interesting. It does only work once. Weird. Not sure why. Oh, yeah, I do. The div is overlapping the button. If the button were outside of the div, it would work. The div takes precedence over the button because the div is outside and the button is inside. Let's try it again. Hello. Click, 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 click. There you go. Ta-da! So that's how you take a JavaScript function and wire it up slapdash into your DOM. Now let me explain why, generally speaking, we won't do this. There's a better approach to this. You can also attach event listeners through JavaScript in a pure sense. Think about the division of labor, right? Ordinarily, when you're working in a company, different people will be responsible for different files, right? the person who's doing the JavaScript will probably be different from the person who's working on the HTML, who's different from the person working on the CSS, right? HTML is a lower skill than JavaScript. You can be quite good at HTML without ever knowing any JavaScript whatsoever. The reverse is not true. To be good at JavaScript, you must know HTML. Therefore, do you want a person who has lower qualifications and can only do HTML digging through your JavaScript to find out what your functions are called? Generally, no. What you do is you say, okay, I'd like you to label this thing, and this thing for me, and I'll just do some JavaScript that uses them, right? This is like the communication between people. It doesn't really matter so much if it's like a solo project, right? Because if it's a solo project, who cares, right? But the idea is that all of you should work for a company and work with other people, so this is like one of those things. The JavaScript person is generally responsible for hooking up their own functions. You know, if you wrote the function, you should be the person to hook it up as well. And you know, also it kind of gets into like version control issues. If you have people working on multiple files, like you might create a merge conflict with the HTML person if you're like digging in their HTML a bunch, you know? You want to avoid touching other people's files wherever possible. So anyway, next time in class we will talk about adding event listeners in JavaScript, but it's basically that process, just slightly more complicated. Yes?
So the code that I wrote for the even and typing hello world, I get null or undefined string.
Okay, I will run around and take a look at people's problems. Yeah.
Go over it very slightly. It's only getting warm and also still getting color as well.
Show me.
What if I want to, like, I don't want
Oh, that's
this to
fine. That's just the return value of the function.
If I don't input anything, it's showing none, right? I
Well,
don't
you
want
don't
this
have
to
any
be shown.
Yes. Like, because when
Like
you're
should be blank. But
You can put actually placeholder in the text area, so it will show like please input the number, or you can just put a one open space so it won't show anything.
placeholder.
Just space, one space. Okay, try that.
Okay, that's good. That's fast. I was thinking like going to JavaScript and creating the values now.
I know. So the odd one works, but
This is simple.
So you are going to reproduce.
Well, that's improvement.
I don't think so. Like so here, it was working before. So I did the whole
Extra semicolon.
oh, wait, I think you went to red now.
You had a comma.
Python.
Slap.
Python problem.
Yeah. Tell me about it. All right, now.
He's like, yo, oh yes, so to go check. He's like, do I have a comma? He's like, do I have a comma too?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You're right. Otherwise, there's no element in the DOM that has that IP, right?
Okay, so that's probably why then I.
Yes. Boom.
Except that I guess you should like here, and this is a paragraph going really well to change it.
Yep.
So how do I add IT
Well, in that case, what you wouldn't be going for IDs. What you do is you write a class for it if you want to grab like multiple paragraphs, right?
And how would I do that?
There's an add class function.
I'll figure it out.
So we'll figure it out. It's not necessary for assignment, whatever, too. Well, it's a property, and it's literally the string between the tags.
Oh, the string between the two HTML.
Correct.
So everything in between the HTML, it'll get that.
Yep. You can read it and you can write it.
So
So grab all paragraphs.
Yeah.
For each of those, for each individual node in that list of nodes, node.innerHTML. So it erases the contents of the inner HTML of every paragraph and replaces it with that string. Sound good?
Yeah, I can help you. This one. I just want to ask if you use this one in the assignment, like with the on input other than on change.
Nah, use on change.
On change?
Yeah. Yeah. Use on change or on pickup.
On here. What about this on input? It's like showing at the same time.
Yeah, it's not on the approved list.
Okay.